Ta'alofa and welcome to the first full episode of the Polynesian Girl Diaries podcast. I'm your host, Katie Famuina. I've given a lot of thought into what I want this first episode to be about. Went through a variety of topics, but ultimately felt very strongly about a particular experience that I am currently going through. Hopefully, those that are receptive can get what they need out of it. I think that's the ultimate objective to this podcast, is being able to share my experiences, and through that people can do with it whatever they will. It's so ironic that I have a podcast because I feel like I'm a pretty closed off person. I'm very private. It really does push me to share my story and to understand that I have a voice and that my story is worth telling. Before we get into that, I want to share something that I felt enlightened me today as I was out on a morning walk. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about free will and coincidences, and if destiny is really a thing or fate is really a thing. I think I've come to understand what my beliefs are. I do believe in coincidences. I think that it is a proactive choice to attach meaning to things that happen in our lives. There is great power in our choices. I would even argue that our choices have an even more profound impact on the outcomes of our lives, more so than destiny or any sort of meaning that we create ourselves. I know that sounds kind of dismissive of the act of trying to find meaning or make connections in your life to certain things that happen, but hear me out. I had someone insist that we were meant to meet. The stars were aligned and the universe created this big opportunity for us to meet, and I entertained the idea for a moment, considering how the coincidence seemed to fit together. In the back of my mind, I definitely had my doubts. It felt almost silly because there were countless variables that played into this that could have altered the outcome, such as timing, availability, distance, receptiveness, and so on. But after that conversation ended, I realized that it wasn't chance or the universe per se that brought us together. It really was a choice that we both made. It was their choice to reach out, it was my choice to respond and entertain that connection. It was their decision to connect, my decision to be receptive to that, as appealing as it can be to search for deeper meaning in certain events. Sometimes it really is just a coincidence, and sometimes it's really just a matter of like your choices were just aligned. I really believe that alignment has a lot more to do with the outcomes that you get in life than it ever has to do with happenstance or destiny or fate. It's kind of like when you have a partner and you choose each other like every single day. Maybe it was through chance that you guys met, but ultimately it's choice that keeps you two together. It's effort. It's willingness to maintain that connection. I think there is a unique beauty in realizing that life circumstances aren't solely based off external factors, but that you can play an active role in creating your desired outcomes. Of course, the efforts and actions of others are part of that equation, so in a sense that's external, but what I am emphasizing is that the true celebration lies in the choices that you made to connect with another human being. So without those choices, obvious as it may sound, the connection would be baseless and non-existent and very much one-sided. And so coming to this realization really meant a lot to me, and I wanted to share that. And if I lost you at trying to explain that, I'm sorry. This year has been such a roller coaster of emotions and experiences for me. It's certainly been one of the most challenging years for me so far. The first half, I feel like, has been chaotic, while the second half has been filled with rebuilding my life and recovering from that chaos. And honestly, I'm so grateful because a lot of people, I understand, aren't always able to get out of a rut, let alone that quickly. And I say quickly very lightly because when you are in the thick of it, it feels endless. As we wrap up the year, I thought it'd be fitting to reflect on some of the rough patches that I went through this year, what I learned, and how I managed to get out of the biggest rut of my life. I started off the year feeling deeply lonely. I ended several relationships that no longer felt healthy for me, and while I knew that these decisions were good for me in the long run, it was incredibly painful. Among them was a long-term friendship that I believed was unbreakable, and although I miss this connection from time to time, I can't ignore the hurt that came from the toxicity I'd been so unwilling to acknowledge. Another pain point was the job I was working at. I was a customer service lead in the medical device industry, which is a field I deeply respect. Paid really well, and I genuinely loved the people that I worked with and what I was doing, but the stresses of a company merger got the best of me. And amid so many changes in my life, I craved stability, and my work environment was far from that. From the structural changes and the constant layoffs to really strong team members quitting left and right, a lot of departments were dissolved, and even though I wasn't laid off, these changes still impacted how I did my job, as customer service tends to interface with a variety of departments. It was also very difficult to see corporate treat layoffs as numbers on a spreadsheet, and it changed the way I view company loyalty and made me realize that no matter how much I loved my job, how well it paid, or how much I enjoyed the people I worked with, it would never be enough for me if I felt like the company I worked for failed to live up to its own values. I was at the darkest time in my life. It took me some time to see that my behavior at work was not normal. I found myself easily drained with simple interactions with people at work, so much so that I started dreading going into office. Mind you, I had been working a hybrid schedule with only 2 days in office, but even then, 2 days in office to me felt insufferable. So much so that I found ways to isolate, either by working away from my cubicle or working in vacant office spaces when my colleagues were out of town. I just didn't want to be around people, and I hated them. I found it ironic at times to be working in customer service for someone who was such a misanthropist, because honestly, people are draining. People can be a lot. I know my shit. I can only imagine knowing what other people are going through and what shit other people are handling themselves. At the end of the day, I understand that people can be draining, but this was a different level of hatred that I started having for people. I don't think it was anyone in particular. It was just people in general. I just wanted to isolate from anyone and everyone. No one was safe from my antisocialness. I mean, I'm naturally an introverted person, but I can gauge when my antisocial habits are a detriment to my mental health, and that was definitely the situation going on here. Of the 3 years that I had worked at this company, it had never been an issue for me. I would soon discover how much of a dark space I was in when I started having frequent emotional outbursts at work, crying for reasons I didn't even understand. I relied heavily on the support of my manager, who consistently listened to me without judgment and with so much grace. I felt so loved in her presence, and I will never forget the space that she held for me. Shout out to you, Christy Ho. You are a real one. You saw me in the ugliest of lights. I mean, I get to an extent that managers are going to see that, like you're going to fucking cry to your manager at some point in your career. But this was, I knew something was off when one day I broke down yet again in her office, and I realized that although she never made me feel like a burden, it wasn't her job to carry the weight of my emotions, and that I needed professional help, someone who could guide me through the overwhelming feelings I was having and couldn't make sense of. I did eventually start therapy, which was a very pivotal part of my healing. I held on to the job as long as I could and then put my 2 weeks in and haven't looked back since. except to claim the valuable lesson of prioritizing my mental health over money, power, or comfort in any given situation. Unfortunately, that was not the end of it, because although getting out of that situation was a relief, it brought a whole new challenge, which was figuring out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, which was incredibly daunting. Should I go back to school? Should I move back home? Should I start over with a completely different career path? These questions weighed heavily on my mind as I navigated the aftermath of my decisions and tried to find my next direction. But it doesn't end there. I had underestimated the competitiveness of the job market. I applied to what seemed to be 1,000 jobs, and although I landed a bunch of interviews, did never really find what I was looking for. I job hopped a ton. I felt helpless when my efforts didn't align with what I wanted. It felt a lot like getting out of a stable, committed, and long-term relationship and being subjected to the uncertainties of dating again, where you might deal with being ghosted or stood up or worrying about coming off too strong or not expressing enough interest. It was rough, to say the least. Like, I'm making light of it now, like I'm laughing and all that, but in the thick of it, definitely not funny. Honorable mention to my interview skills, which were really rusty. And I've always hated feeling like I needed to sell myself to other people or to convince them to see my value. But I knew that if I wanted a job, it was inevitable to go through that process. So I kind of just had to suck it up and, practice, practice, practice. There were also a lot of times where I felt like I nailed an interview only to find out that they had moved forward with someone else. There were times where I wouldn't hear back from the job until like a month later when I'm already pursuing another job. And I'm just like, why? Why would you do that? Annoying. There were one too many times where I had put all my eggs in one basket and was like betting on a job and went through a round of interviews only to feel like let on when they made a decision that wasn't me. It was incredibly discouraging, and I feel for anyone who is currently job searching right now. I am a living testament that it is possible, because in the summer I landed a temp job that exposed me to analyst work, and I found myself really enjoying that type of work, and that opened up another door to the job that I am currently at, one that I am grateful for every single day, and a job that I would consider to be my dream job. I'm going to brag about myself a little bit here, as my boss told me to. I'm a top performer on my team, and I'm really proud of myself for pulling myself out of the fucking dipshit hole I was in to where I am now. And I'm completely humbled by the experiences that I went through to get here. But I am telling you that if you're feeling hopeless right now, see it through, man. It's rough in the moment, but things will start to look up, I promise. I know it's hard to feel like there's really anything to live for. I definitely went to that headspace in the midst of uncertainty while I was dealing with all of this. Whew. But things eventually started to look up once I started to make plans and execute the plans that I was making. Eventually, I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. It was evident that my mental health was drastically improving. I felt stable in the relationships that I was entertaining. And on top of that, I landed my dream job, in which I'm a top performer at. What more could I ask for? But if I were to sum it up from what I've learned from having to rebuild my life again, it's the following things. My first bit of advice is to prioritize your mental health. I kid you not, no amount of money, no amount of power is worth sacrificing your mental health over. Walking away from that job, despite the strong relationships I'd built with my coworkers, the paycheck, and the comfort of financial stability was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. None of that compared to the agony of waking up every day, feeling deeply unhappy and disconnected from myself. I know how terrifying it is to leave behind something that feels safe, but trust me when I say this, your well-being is priceless. And nothing is more important than reclaiming your peace. The second thing that I learned is that experience cultivates understanding. They say that experience is bittersweet, bitter in the moment as you navigate the pain and challenges, but sweet when you look back and see everything that you've learned and the strength that you've gained along the way. And I often remind myself that these struggles were necessary for me to better understand who I am and to recognize just how resilient I can be in moments of distress. While I wouldn't wish for those hard times or to go through that ever again, I'm really grateful for what it taught me and for the clarity that it gave me to move forward with purpose and confidence. Another takeaway from this experience was to lean into my support system. I am absolutely indebted to the incredible support system that I have. I know that not everyone has that, but it's also just not easy to open up about these sort of things. It's an extremely vulnerable space to be in. It also cultivates deeper and more meaningful connections, and I've drawn so much strength from my support system and will forever be grateful for that when I needed it the most. My last point to wrap it all up is to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. As valuable as external resources are, I think it's critical to understand that the most important source of support is yourself. I've realized that relying solely on outside help isn't sustainable, and at the end of the day, you are the one who will always be there for you. I know my last point emphasized the importance of leaning on others, but what I'm really trying to say is that your own strength and decisions and ability to take control of your life are ultimately what guide you. As much as your loved ones care about you and want to make your life seamless, it's really going to come down to you to take responsibility for your life and make the choices that are best for your well-being. That wraps up the first episode. I hope that you are able to take away something meaningful. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care of yourself.